What happens when an old man counting coins gets mocked until a Marine steps in? Find out on Graceful Valor Stories. He laid out the coins slowly, one by one. The waitress sighed. Someone at the next booth chuckled. Maybe he should have stayed home, they whispered. He didn't argue, just kept counting. No one offered to help. No one cared until a Marine stood up, walked to the counter, and paid the bill without saying a single word. The bell over the door gave a soft jingle as it swung open, letting in a gust of cold morning air. Howard Mason stepped inside, carefully closing the door behind him. He paused just past the entrance, his eyes adjusting to the warm light of the diner. His coat was clean, but worn at the edges. His hands were rough, his back slightly bent. The place wasn't full, just a few regulars scattered across booths and stools, the kind of quiet that felt personal. Howard moved toward the counter, not rushed, not slow, just steady, like a man who'd walked through winters before. He took a seat at the far end of the counter. The vinyl squeaked slightly beneath him. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a folded napkin and unwrapped it carefully. Inside were coins, mostly quarters and dimes, some nickels, a few pennies. He started to count, lining them up one by one on the counter. The waitress, mid-40s, chewing gum, approached with a notepad. She didn't smile. Coffee? Howard gave a small nod. And maybe some eggs and toast if this covers it. She looked at the coins, raised an eyebrow. We're not a donation center, you know. Howard didn't respond. He just kept counting. A soft clink with each coin. A man in a booth nearby leaned into his friend and muttered, "If you have to count change to eat, maybe stay home." The friend chuckled. Neither of them looked ashamed. Howard heard it. Of course he did, but he said nothing. His fingers moved slower now. The waitress sighed and walked off. At that moment, the door jingled again. Someone else had entered, but Howard didn't turn around. He just kept looking at his coins, trying to pretend the whispers didn't sting. If you believe no one deserves to be mocked for struggling, and that quiet dignity still matters in this world, hit subscribe and stay with us on Graceful Valor Stories. A Marine's quiet act changes everything. What's the story behind Howard's coins? Stay tuned on Graceful Valor Stories. And if this moment stirred something in you, tell us what you felt in the comments. We read every word. The coins sat in neat little rows on the counter. Howard double-checked the total, then quietly set the napkin beside them. He kept his eyes low, as if looking up might cost him more than a hot meal. The waitress returned with the coffee, placing the mug down harder than necessary. Some of it sloshed over the edge. Howard nodded, grateful. "Thank you." She didn't answer, just wiped the counter with a quick flick of her wrist and looked over the coin pile. "You're short by 40 cents, she said flatly. Howard reached into his pocket again. Only lint. No more coins. He hesitated. I could take just the toast, then." She folded her arms. "Look, sir, I've got paying customers. I'm not running a shelter here." At the booth nearby, the young man from earlier chuckled again. Maybe he's practicing for a part. Local grandpa learns the value of $1. His girlfriend laughed too, loud enough for Howard to hear. The old man looked down at the coffee. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the mug, trying not to spill. He took a sip. No sugar, no cream, just hot and bitter. The diner fell into that strange hush, the kind that lingers when something's wrong, but no one wants to be the one to say it. Behind him, the door had opened again. Someone else had entered. A few heads turned, but most looked away. Howard didn't notice. He was focused on trying to hand back one piece of toast that had already been plated. "I really don't mind," he said softly. "Just the coffee is enough." The waitress looked annoyed. She was about to respond when a low, steady voice cut in from behind. "I'll cover it." Everyone turned. The man who had just walked in now stood beside the counter, pulling out a black wallet from his back pocket. He wore a gray hoodie. The letters stitched across the chest said just one word, Marines. The Marine handed his card to the waitress without another word. She hesitated, caught off guard. You sure? He nodded once, calm, not smiling, not looking for a thank you. The young couple in the booth went silent. The girl looked down at her phone. The guy leaned back, arms crossed, trying to act unfazed. The Marine stood still, eyes on Howard, but only for a moment. Then he turned to the waitress again. Add some eggs and sausage. Howard looked up, confused. I didn't ask him to. You didn't have to, the Marine replied. Then he walked to the booth near the window and sat down without waiting for a response. He didn't make a show of it. No speech, no nods, just returned to his coffee and stared out the window like nothing had happened. The diner stayed quiet. Even the kitchen seemed to have paused. Howard looked down at the food that had been brought back, now freshly plated, warm, full, a real breakfast, the kind he hadn't ordered in years. He picked up the fork slowly. His hands weren't used to kindness like this anymore. At the counter, the waitress softened just a little. She placed cream and sugar beside the coffee without saying anything. No eye rolls this time. Howard didn't eat right away. He looked at the Marine sitting by the window, still quiet, still watching the snowfall outside. Something about the way the man sat, the posture, the stillness, it felt familiar. Not from a place, but from a time. Howard finally took a bite. The eggs were warm, soft, cooked just right. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had sausage, or when someone else had thought he was worth the extra plate. He chewed slowly, not from age, but from the weight in his chest. It wasn't just food. It was the kind of kindness that didn't ask questions, and didn't want anything back. He looked again toward the booth, but the Marine wasn't there. The window seat sat empty, a half-finished cup of coffee still steaming on the table. The waitress came by quietly. She refilled Howard's cup and slid the receipt beside it, already stamped, paid. She cleared her throat, almost awkward. He said to tell you, no thanks necessary. Howard blinked. He laughed? She nodded. Didn't want to interrupt your breakfast. Howard stared at the receipt, then at the hot plate in front of him. His hands stayed still on the table. The diner's usual hum was back. Forks tapping plates, low conversations, but it all sounded different now. In a world that often forgot men like him, someone had remembered, not with words, but with action. He stood slowly, walked over to the booth where the Marine had sat, picked up the folded napkin the man had left behind. There was nothing inside it. No note, just an old habit. Maybe a sign that he had once counted coins, too. Howard sat back down, this time with a little more presence. He stirred cream into his coffee, took a slow sip, and allowed himself to feel full. Not just from the meal, but from the moment. And then, finally, he asked the question softly, not to the room, but to the air. Why did he do that? The bell above the diner door jingled again. Howard looked up, expecting a stranger. But it was him. The Marine had returned. Same calm face, same quiet step. He didn't sit this time, just walked over to Howard's table and stood beside it for a moment. You're Sergeant Howard Mason, right? Howard blinked, caught off guard. I haven't used that title in a long time. The Marine nodded. My father did. Howard tilted his head. I'm sorry? The man reached into his back pocket and pulled out an old creased photo. He placed it gently on the table. It was a grainy image. Sand, dust, shadows of men crouched behind a smoking Humvee. And in the middle, barely visible but unmistakable, a younger Howard was dragging another man by the vest, shielding him with his own body. Howard stared at it. I remember this, he said, voice cracking. That was Iraq, Fallujah. We were ambushed near a radio tower. The Marine pointed at the injured man in the photo. That was my father. Howard's mouth opened slightly. His eyes scanned the face again. Lieutenant Carson took shrapnel to the leg. I didn't think he made it. He did, the Marine said quietly. Because of you. You pulled him out under fire. Saved his life. Howard leaned back, stunned. That was over 20 years ago. I was 9, the Marine replied. I remember when he came home, limping, scarred, but alive. He used to tell me that story every birthday. Said, if I ever met you, I'd know. Howard looked down at the photo again. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, the Marine said. That's why it mattered. They sat in silence for a moment. No fanfare, no applause, just two men, one who had given, one who had received, finally standing in the same place. I thought I'd never get the chance, the Marine added, to say thank you. Howard reached across the table, eyes glassy but proud, and shook his hand. You just did. The young man in the booth, the one who had mocked Howard earlier, had been listening. He shifted uncomfortably now, pretending to scroll through his phone, but the screen was dark. His girlfriend whispered, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, quietly, folding his arms like he could disappear into the seat. The waitress had heard, too. She walked back over slower this time, holding the same notepad, but she didn't write anything. I didn't know, she said softly, about who you were. Howard gave a small shrug. Most people don't. I never mentioned it. From a table in the back, an older man stood up. He wore a faded American Legion jacket and moved with a slight limp. Howard Mason, he asked across the room. Howard turned, surprised. Yes, sir. I served out of Kandahar the year after you left. Heard your name more than once. He walked over, extended a hand, and gave a quiet nod of respect. Another man followed, then a woman. One by one, a few of the regulars made their way to Howard's table, not in a rush, not loud, just quietly placing their hands on his shoulder, or nodding in gratitude. The diner's mood had shifted completely. The owner stepped out from the back, a heavy-set man in a white apron. He looked around, took a breath, then approached Howard's booth. Sergeant Mason, he said carefully. If you ever want to eat here again, it's on the house every time. Howard looked up, overwhelmed. I can't accept that. You already did enough, the owner replied. Some of us just forgot what service looks like. Then, without asking, the owner pointed to the empty wall near the counter. I'd like to put that photo up there. The one with you pulling that soldier to safety. We'll frame it with your name. Howard didn't answer right away. He just stared at the spot on the wall, the same one where they posted football flyers and pie specials. For the first time in years, someone wanted to remember him, not out of pity, but pride, and that was something he didn't know he needed. Later that evening, Howard sat in his small apartment above the hardware store. The walls were bare except for a single shelf that held a few worn paperbacks and a faded photo in a wooden frame. A younger Howard in uniform, standing beside a Humvee, all dust and sun and youth. He reached for his wallet and pulled out the napkin the Marine had left behind. Still blank, still folded, just right. Howard smiled. Some habits never die. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a box. Inside, a few old service medals, scratched, unpolished, not displayed, just kept, along with a dog tag that had bent slightly near the clasp. He hadn't spoken of those years in a long time. After the fire took his house and most of his things, he told himself it didn't matter, that the past could stay in the past. No one needed to remember who he'd been. He sipped his tea, looked out the window at the quiet street below. Christmas lights flickered across the diner's roof across the way. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not because of what he had, but because of who he was, even if the world had nearly forgotten. The next morning, he carefully placed the Marine's napkin in the box with his medals, then closed it, locked it, and smiled. Because for Howard Mason, someone had remembered, and that was more than enough. By the end of the week, the diner had changed. The wall near the counter, the one where flyers used to hang, now held a framed photo, Howard's photo, the same one the Marine had carried. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Sergeant Howard Mason, for service that asked nothing, but gave everything. People stopped to look. Some asked questions. Others just stared, quietly taking in the face of a man they had once overlooked. Howard never made a big deal of it. He still came in most mornings, sat at the same counter stool, still counted his coins out of habit, not necessity. The staff stopped charging him weeks ago, and he always left 2 quarters beneath his mug before walking out, a quiet nod to where it all began. The young couple from that day never returned, but others took their place, and they knew the story now. Sometimes parents would whisper to their children as they passed the photo. "He's the one who pulled that soldier out. He paid for his meal without a word." Howard never corrected them. He just smiled when they nodded at him, because recognition had never been the goal, but being remembered, being respected, that was something else entirely. And so, in a small-town diner, where laughter once came at his expense, his silence now spoke louder than anyone else's voice. Because sometimes the strongest men are the ones who say the least. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who gave quietly and never asked to be remembered, share their name in the comments. And if you believe dignity doesn't need a spotlight, subscribe to hear more stories like Howard's on Graceful Valor Stories. We tell them because someone. A hidden past revealed. How will Howard's story change the diner forever? Discover more on Graceful Valor Stories.